Welcome back to the podcast. Today I have the legend, Chuck Patton. He's known as a director, storyteller, and many other things. But Chuck, as a first time guest, I want your origin story. What got you into comic books and made you a lifelong fan?
That's a tough one because there's a long story version, which I've told millions of times, and I'm bored of hearing it. And then there's the flippin' short one. And I'll give you the flippin' short one. What got me into comics is somebody died. And I got to fill their place. And I'm very grateful about that. Now, I'll forever be grateful about that. I had a lot of people who not inadvertently directly, but I'm going to directly help me along the way. And it's a huge list, but I'll get to the pertinent ones. But this is a career that I have wanted since I was a toddler.
But tell us who Chuck Patton is for the new fans who know nothing about you.
Okay, I'm a veteran comic book artist / animation director, now retired. I've put in 40 years in the business, from comics to animation. I have more time in animation than I actually have in comics. But I'm known in comics because I came up at a time where I had significant books from DC. I was a Stone Cold DC guy. And I was brought into DC by the editor-in-chief and premier artist, inker of the business, Dick Giordano. I was one of his students in New Talent Showcase. That was the beginning of that. And I went through the class and thought I was the worst guy. And then he took me aside one day and graduated me without me knowing. And I was given over to Len Wein after meeting Marv Wolfman and George Perez in the same office. Again, thought they were going to fire me, kick me out of the class because there was a lot of dropouts that came in. We started with 30 people and went through them regularly. I think by the time I was moved over, we had 15 people left in the class. But in my class, I was the only one that really came through. And I came in thinking one thing and was told there was an artist who was doing a book, and they asked me my opinion of his work. That artist was a man named Gene Day, who was a Canadian artist, great artist, who worked for both Marvel and DC. He had to be, because what I found out after Lynn asked me, what do you think of his work? And I was being a real fanboy. I went, oh, he's great. And he goes, no, tell me what you really think. And at that time, Dick had taught me a lot about being critical and very analytical about our work. And I said, Gene overly relies on photographs, does a lot of swipes. I don't see a lot of his original drawing in there as much as I see him looking at other people's stuff. And Lynn went, that's pretty dead on, kid. And I'm like, okay, what do I do now? I get fired? And he goes, no, Gene died today. And I went, oh my God. It was like, I for that one moment, here I am thinking one thing. And then all of a sudden I'm given this test question that really, I thought, okay, this is really going to kick me out. And then there's a back of my mind going, why are they asking me? Why don't you just say leave, kid? And they're like, no, we need someone to take over his book. He was doing one of the last of the Graven Abodes. Graven Abode was coming to an end because Jim Aparo was moving on. They're going to create a Batman and the Outsiders. So they're killing off Graven Abode. But there were several artists that came in at the end. And Gene was one of them. And unfortunately, Gene died on the drawing table.
So you always imagined yourself working in the comic book industry from a young kid?
Yes.
That was your
goal?
Got me in
a lot of trouble.
So when you were growing up, did you actually think you had the talent? Or did you have to grow into the talent?
This is weird because of internets and everything. We were just talking earlier about talking to young talent. And you meet a lot of young talent who had far more instruction, far more encouragement than those of us old fogies. I had the love of reading that my parents had gave me, my mother had gave me specifically. The encouragement, she also loved comics. I don't know any other adult who loved comics back then as much as my mom. And she taught me how to read on comics. So it was imprinted in me. And my drawing came just naturally. And what I'm telling you all this is that was really the only positive kind of direction I was given. I had 5 seconds where I could have been a part of a program that was called the Famous Artist Course. That was really big in the 50s and 60s. But I turned it down because they wanted $1,000 from my parents, and my folks were regular people. They were not people with money who had.
And that was a lot of money back then.
That was a lot of money back then. I didn't care. So why I'm telling you this is that I had a passion and a drive. That I could tell you. I had an obsession, even when I was told differently. And even my mom, who wanted to encourage me, was scared of me following this path because, as she bluntly said to me, we don't know a lot of people like us out there. We don't know a lot of people like us doing this business, meaning Black people. And here I am in the this is now the mid 60s, and she's trying not to discourage me. And I'm so caught up in the love of the work that I didn't care. I love whenever I saw a Black person in comics.
Did your
And I
mom
mean,
think because you were a Black man that it would hinder you getting into the profession, maybe?
absolutely,
Or
absolutely, all of
did
it.
you think
On
that
the
would be
other
a
hand, she was so enthralled of my work. I remember hearing her and my father talking. My father believed I can do anything. And she's saying, I just don't want him to go out there and lie. And he goes, how is he going to learn? And I knew then was like, all right, they never got in my way. They never said, don't try. Even
Did
when
you-
this famous artist course came up, they were willing to pay that money. I wasn't willing to see them go through that. I was
That was
9 years old. I had a lot going on back then in family-wise and I won't get into it, but just say that I saw what my people were struggling with. And I saw what they were willing to give me. And they gave me a lot. But that was just something I knew. And maybe even a little part of me was like, what if I took this and I still failed? And that would have been $1,000 I could have went elsewhere. So I thought, I'm going to just go through this. I was a pretty sharp kid. I was sending letters. I had a letter to Stan Lee I wish I kept. It would have been worth a lot of money now. That Stan gave me the breakdown of how to do comics. This is probably,
was it a personal letter or more of a template letter that they just sent out?
it was definitely a form letter, but it was an involved form letter. I give Stan credit. Years later, I could never tell him about it because I could see that he would never know. But it meant a lot to me, and it made me to starve the neighborhood because I would show it everywhere.
Did you think being a Black man would hinder you getting into the industry at the time?
I didn't think it as much as I was aware that it could, because there was enough things happening to say, hey, you couldn't. On the other hand, I looked at the guys who kept doing it anyway, whether they were actors, whether they were performers, because that's what our exposure was. You named the Black actor, whether they were Sidney Poitier or Jim Brown. Those guys went somewhere, and some of them had stories similar or even different, but still, that was my representation was there, which said if they did it, maybe I could do it. And if I fail, I fail.
You never considered going to Marvel?
I did. Years later, I did go to Marvel when I was a new talent. But once I got accepted into DC, I was given assignments, and I realized now it's a real job because I had to not only finish what Gene was doing, they wanted me to start from scratch. So whatever Gene had drew was left with the Dave family, or DC paid for it and whatever, but they wanted me to redraw the book. I only had 3 weeks to do it.
Are you a fast artist?
That's how I got the job, according to Lynn. When they told me Gene died, when Lynn told me this, and I'm like, what? He goes, here's the thing. Dick told me you're the fastest guy in the class. Now, you got to realize Dick was the hardest. I thought Dick was the hardest on me. I thought I was the worst guy. I wasn't overly flowery. I was very methodical about what I tried to do, and I made a lot of mistakes. And it was a running joke that he would tell me whenever he looked at my pages, Patton, you went out of your way to be boring. And I was like, oh, goddamn. And that would send me off to redraw, whatever. We had 1 day a week to work with him. And he was a strong teacher, a strong taskmaster. And all of a sudden, him to just suddenly pull me out of a class. He saw things I didn't see. I saw me working, doing everything I could. He saw me taking direction, delivering. Even when I failed, even if I was being boring, I delivered. And they needed someone to deliver. And so that's how I interpret it. Because as Lynn said, you're the fastest guy, and I need someone to draw this in 3 weeks. Would you do it?
What was it like working with Len?
Len Wein was my mentor, my second strongest mentor. Len taught me a lot to this day. Everything I use in my storytelling, from directing to working with writers to breaking down scripts, I learned from Len. The lessons I learned from him that I evolved later from my own stuff. But Len was the one who taught me. He was a hell of a teacher and a very good person to work with.
Did Dick filter through later aspects of your career? Did you use some of the things that he used, and did he influence your style and how you did things?
He was an influence on my style before I came there. I was always a huge big Dick Giordano fan. I knew of his Charlton comics. I bought half that stuff. Whatever dollars I made as a kid, that went totally into comics. And so I knew his work and I studied. I always loved the strong draftsman. I wasn't crazy about guys. I had a hard time at first with Kirby. I liked Kirby's early stuff, but later on I had a hard time with it. And then I gradually grew into it because if you're an artist and you're smart, you learn. But I love the strong draftsman for me. Gil Kane was a huge influence on me. John Buscema was a huge influence on me. Of course, Neil Adams and then Dick, because Dick was following Neil. And so in the class, you got Dick's point of view on how to apply the comics. I learned from Dick, and so Dick taught me storytelling.
So you started with JLA right around 217. Did you know the ultimate direction it was going to go down?
No, here's the weird thing again, because it was a weird time. Because once I got that Brave and the Bold story, and I really thought it was going to be one and done, but apparently that was my graduation gift. It was like, okay, now that you've come in and you drew this book and you did a great job, how would you like to take over JLA?
Were you gobsmacked over that?
Yeah.
Here you are, a young buck, and all of a sudden they're giving you one of their flagship titles.
Yeah. That was that point again where you got to believe in yourself more than anything else. People were believing and trusting you, but you got to believe in yourself. I always fought with what we now later call imposter syndrome. I always felt, or second and third guessing myself, was I good enough? But I also had a work ethic of, look, someone trusts you with something you need to finish, even if you fail, even if you screw it up. And even when I did that Brave and the Bold, and I thought, I knew it was the best thing I've ever drawn. It was the first thing I ever really drawn. And then to be offered JLA for the reasons of, honestly, Don Heck wanted to leave. He was going to do Wonder Woman. Lynn, in his heart, wanted someone to shake it up, somebody new. And they thought, hey, here's the new kid. Let's put it on him. We want to bring in new people, so let's do that instead of bringing in the usual guys who have done it. And who would have? And later on, most of those guys came back and did the book anyway. And I'm talking about guys like George Tuska.
Yes.
But who I admired all those guys. They were the strong draftsmen again. So me getting that book was like, yeah, gobsmack was a nice way of putting it.
Because you started with the JLA satellite era, and you even got to work on a JLA JSA team up, which must have been a highlight at the time because you were working with Roy Thomas.
It should have been.
It should have been.
It should have been. You got to realize JLA was my first, as a kid, that was one of my, I read Avengers too, but JLA was my book. I knew every damn member in there, and I knew the JLA, JSA, the crossover books, those are huge. That's why I'm saying should have been, because by the time I'm doing it, I'm rushing just to get shit done. But on the other hand, I want the gravitas of JLA, JSA. And as soon as I started working with Roy, I realized, oh my God, this guy is a walking encyclopedia.
He is.
And everything was a reference of something done before. And I really wanted to go in. It's funny. He wasn't talking to me of JLA history as much as DC history. Because I remember all the JLA team-ups. Whether it was Dick Dillon drawing it, whether it was Mike Sekowsky. Let's not forget Mike Sekowsky. His name would come back later. Mike Sekowsky was the original artist on JLA.
Did you like Dick Dillon's work?
Not as much as I like Sekowsky's.
Really?
It's weird about Dick Dillon because as I analyzed as a fanboy and then later as an artist, his draftsmanship was impeccable. His storytelling, that's what lacked for me. You start learning what the shortcuts are, especially when you're drawing a team book. And I had a dinner with Don Heck where he really laid it on the line to me, what it was going to entail. And I owe Don Heck a lot because of that. He was the first to really tell me what I was getting into and taking over that book from him and what the expectations were. And I didn't get a chance to talk to George about it because let's not forget, George took the book over too after Dillon. So I was looking at George's work more than Dillon.
Because Dillon had a heart attack in the middle of the script that he was doing, and then Arez took over because I was a Bronze Age baby and I was getting comic books in the 70s and 78. Everything was golden. The worst terrible crap was great for me. So Dick Dillon is high up there because I was getting the JLA during that, and he's like, I still like Dick Dillon and stuff, and now I can look, it's Dick Dillon, and other people are like, who cares? But anyway, so
I'm appreciating him better now than I did then. Again, I knew his shortcuts and I knew what he did. And it was weird to me that he was, look, again, it's not a matter of boring. It was just what was exciting to me. I got more excited, interested, and learned more looking at Kurt Swan, even a Kurt Schaffenberger. I know that's a name people don't bring up a lot. I saw more things that taught me than Dick Dillon. And yet I had to go back and look at what Dillon was doing because he was, I think, the longest running guy on JLA.
Yes, he was. Yes.
So it's like you pay respect, but you also, I did not want to become a clone of his. And
Gotcha.
I saw George, and George's stuff was always exciting. And he was a lot more accessible for me art-wise. That I saw things he was doing. It was like, okay, I want that excitement in there. So I tried to bring that into my time. So when I took over JLA, one of the big changes again was here I am, the new guy, no credits, taking it over. And then the biggest shakeup I knew right off the bat that was going to be a challenge was Jerry was going to lead the book. In fact, when I got the first script, that's when Jerry decided to take a hiatus from it. They couldn't even be straight. Is he quitting completely or is he taking a hiatus? The thing is that he's not going to be on the book when you start. And we were starting a trilogy, which I was excited about, was The Beastman. The Beastman was supposed to be my first JLA book. And then with him leaving, I was drawing. I got maybe 8 pages drawn, 6 pages drawn before Lynn says, oh, stop. We got to rethink. We're going to put this aside. And Lynn was teaching me a lot about plotting on that book because Jerry was doing some things. You could tell from the script that he was checking out. And I always respected Jerry, as I told him when we was talking together the first time. His Spider-Man clone blew me away. I loved what he was doing on Spider-Man. I loved his Spidey stuff. As much as I grew up on Ditko time and loved Ditko's approach, respected Romita's, I really loved what Ross Andrew and Jerry was doing. When that happened, when he was going to walk off, it made sense. Lynn would tell me, that was the other thing great about Lynn. Lynn wouldn't just tell me edicts. He would tell me the story of whatever, because he went through, that was his roommate. I knew why Swamp Thing and Man-Thing existed at the same time and why they didn't sue each other, because they were roommates. They basically cribbed each other. And made a gentleman's agreement of, hey, if you can sell this, go for it. And Marvel and DC bought it without realizing, oh, shit. But he had a long history, plus with Marv. These guys, they were roommates. They played cards every week. These were all, they had that kind of synergy I missed as a fanboy coming up. These were fan guys who became pros. And I wanted that, but I was in a vacuum. He saw that, and so he would tell me. So I knew Jerry was tired. He was burnt out. He had other opportunities coming up, which was television.
DC was going through, during that time from like the late 70s through 85, DC was going through so many upheavals and changes and things because just all the craziness that was going on at DC at the time. It was a really different type of company. And when people talk about it, it's like you got to look at the context of the times to understand what was going on. Again, you have to look at why he was burnt out, what was going on.
Also, Marvel took the lead on being more mature with their stuff. I think the advent of the X-Men, the climb of Daredevil from being this kind of C character to an A character. By the time we got into it, it was a B, and then all of a sudden, boom, it took off with Miller. It was a tumultuous moment, and writing-wise, the thing about Marvel that was difficult because we already knew about Shooter in Charge, and so there was a sort of, I got to meet him later and realized, what an interesting, complex guy he was. Saint and sinner at the same time.
He wasn't perfect, but he came at Marvel and he did stuff that was very controversial and people didn't like it. But you have to look at a train wreck that Marvel was between Roy Thomas and Shooter, but Marvel was a train wreck. And Shooter came along.
He comes in and he's the conductor that got it on the tracks again.
And then on the flip side, you have Jeanette Kahn, who was a female outside the comic book industry, 28. They were both in the same age range.
The difference was Jim was a creator and Jeanette wasn't. Jeanette was an exec. Jim came up, again, no different than the guys. We're talking about Jerry starting at 19. Jim was like 14 years old. There's history there, and there's also passion. That's that key word again, passion.
And Weisberger, who was his editor, didn't know he was 14 at the time. He'd be like, let me talk to your mom, please. Talk to your mom for a minute.
Mom so I can exploit you.
When you heard about they were going from JLA Satellite to JLA Detroit, what was your first initial reaction to that?
Well, here's the thing. We never called it JLA Detroit.
That was
That's my part in the history books now. I mean, we really conservatively were trying to, without BSing around, we're trying to replicate Teen Titans into JLA. The Teen Titans, what Marvin and George did with Teen Titans was revolutionary. That was the hottest book. It gave a DC an opening to the fandom that Marvel was grabbing. And both books could exist. X-Men and Titans could exist with separate attraction. So here's JLA, and Avengers is Avengers. Avengers already had what it had. I always saw Avengers survive purely because of Buscema, to be truthful. So, there's a consistent look there. Whether he changed inkers or not, you still have Buscema doing the flagship guys. And here was JLA, and our problem at JLA that most people don't realize too is we had an editorial problem of you got every major character on that book had their own book. Every major character of JLA had at one point, well, you got Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Green Lantern, Green Arrow. Everybody had their own book. And so that meant other continuities are happening. Some books are selling better than others. But the thing is that here's JLA. Whatever was happening in those books couldn't affect what was happening in JLA. It was almost like, okay, if Green Arrow and Speedy are going through drugs, you couldn't bring that up in JLA because by the time that JLA story was being done, that other storyline, Green Lantern, probably taken off and Speedy's now a cross-dresser. We don't know. But the thing, that was I'm throwing controversial shit in there because in a lot of ways, that's how it felt. Nobody could track what was going on in their books if it was going to be changed elsewhere. So that was one of the reasons that kind of Marv saw as an opportunity to bring in the Stark Crisis, to clean up that continuity, to restart. Some characters who we knew were never going to sell, they're going to change. They're going to just completely revamp. And so here I am coming into JLA with my hopes of being the new Mike Sikowski, George Perez, maybe wink, wink, Dick Dillon. And then I'm being told, hey, guess what? I had the book for a year, actually. And also floating between multiple writers. So there was again, that was one big thing was that at first I had Jerry and then Jerry's gone. The book I wanted.
And then he came back after a while.
Yeah.
He did come back.
Yeah. But when he came back, that's when he got, and he said he had enthusiasm to change to follow the formula of the Titans.
Did you like the changes that they were proposing?
As a part of it, of course I liked it. It was encouraging. I'm finally in the job of my life.
So I'm happy with
all these things. I want to be in there. And then I'm seeing other guys, other young contemporaries, and they're starting to be encouraged to be creative. That's what I wanted to be, encouraged. I wanted to be a storyteller. I wanted to eventually become a writer-artist myself. Jerry gave me a lot of great lessons as we went.
Did you and Jerry work together a lot on that?
At the beginning of JLA Detroit, to make it separate. But on JLA itself, once he stepped, it was just me and Lynn. And Lynn would guide me to this writer and that writer. And some guys were doing great stuff. Some were not.
So that incarnation of JLA didn't go as well as expected at DC.
Not at all.
Was everybody surprised with the reaction to it at the time?
At the beginning, everybody had that, let's keep hopeful. You know what I mean? You wouldn't know, okay, if they didn't feel like, hey, let's try it. You never know. Hey, listen, when we did Titans, there wasn't this overwhelming love of it at the beginning. It took a while. And so everybody felt the same with JLA Detroit was that. And again, we never called it JLA Detroit. And
no,
in some ways,
I know.
We just called it New JLA. That was really.
It was the new JLA.
But nobody wanted to say New JLA either. That's when I was like the first light bulb that, ooh, this is really riding on one hit. If we hit and do well, we're going to do good. And we did, and I had to stop the book for a while.
You took a break between 228 and 232.
I didn't take a break. What I did do was I had to be sidelined. We were developing the new book by then, so I couldn't do both. I wanted to. I probably would have killed myself like a dummy because I was a kid, and I wanted to do the Martian story. I love Martians, so I wanted to read. I had to do the covers.
I just saw you had that break there. I wasn't sure exactly what was going on. I was
During
curious.
That break, I was recreating we were creating the JLA. By that time, I moved to California, and Jerry's out in California. So we had lunch, and I would go to his house, or we go to this restaurant. We went to this restaurant first to hear his breakdown of what he wanted to do, and he basically wanted to play catch. In other words, he was encouraging me to collaborate, and that's all I ever wanted. And so the whole picking Detroit, looking back at it now, we were both leaning to LA. But it was too easy. And everybody remember West Coast Avengers not happily. I didn't grow up in Chicago. I grew up in Detroit.
So
and,
you did it. So that was one of the factors.
That was the reason why.
Yeah.
We wanted to keep it. That was the thing at the beginning where it really felt good and it felt very earnest. And that's why everybody was excited, was because Jerry was like, I want to bring, what worked for the Titans is obviously it tapped into Marvel New York. They were in New York. So we wanted to bring this sort of synergy into the new JLA. And I thought, wouldn't it be outrageous? Look, JLA used to be in a damn cave. And they went from a cave to the satellite. They lost the satellite, which I liked because I never liked the design of the damn thing. And I thought the whole idea is to bring them down to the street. And what better street that most people don't know was Jerry already had this inkling. And I'll tell you this, he's the one that wanted the whole breakdancing stuff. In fact, he came right out and said, I saw breaking. I love that stuff. And I'm a jazz R&B guy. I don't like, that's not cool. But he's the elder statesman. And I loved his enthusiasm, what he wanted to do. And we're also living in LA when we saw a lot of Latino kids doing this. And that's where I think we made the mistake, that we should have maybe stayed with LA. Because all the elements he wanted to do was much more LA than Detroit. I grew up in Detroit. We had gangs, but not like they had it out in LA. But we added those elements into it because Jerry just thought it was exciting him at the moment. And I went, okay, that's what I want. This is what it's about.
The JLA was a bold reimagining of the whole concept. I give you guys credit. Do you think that DC editorially gave you guys the full support of the series?
Here's the thing. Dick was always supportive. Dick backed me on stuff. I mean, I wouldn't have had a job if it weren't for him. But he also had backed off because man got busy. So I wanted more hands-on, and Len got busy. So they brought in a new editor who, frankly, wasn't a comic guy. And he was a guy who just dot the I's, cross the T's. I've always sadly looked at Alan Gold as like an accountant, which is unfair. He was a nice guy, very earnest, but not someone I can creatively collaborate with. I could sit in, Len would order lunch, and we'd sit and just talk shit. Comic book shit, sometimes geek shit. And sometimes those things would translate into the book. And he inspired me in a lot of ways that way. I didn't have that with Alan. And with Jerry, all of a sudden, once we got past the conceptual stage, once we got past the annual, which is why I took all that time off, because that was 40 freaking pages I had to draw for that annual. And then the 4-part series to set it up. So that was literally 8 books I had to draw. And that's why I missed those 4. Why I didn't do the Martian trilogy was because I was designing the book. The other thing that broke my heart was, and I didn't know, and I guess I should have been louder about it. I was loud later, but it didn't help. Not only I had multiple writers, I had multiple inkers. I didn't have a consistent inker that I could really trust and learn from, as well as show what I wanted to do. And so some people I liked or was settled with. And there's some people who eventually, when we got on the JLA Detroit, when the book came out, I was not happy with the inking on any of those.
And what made you decide to eventually leave?
So if you had like baseball, you get 3 strikes, right? So in this case, I didn't mind the change. JLA had to change. There was no doubt about it. Look, I grew up on the damn book. By this point, I'm hitting my late 20s, and that's 20-something years of JLA, so I get it.
This is also the beginning of the most tumultuous point of DC history, because you're getting right to Crisis, and everything's getting revamped and rechanged, and everything's up in the air.
Oh, yeah, because Crisis by that time hits the ground, and then, change is happening. And some characters who I really wanted to have, there was one off the bat that I wanted to have, because originally we didn't come up with original characters at first. Jerry had said we should, and then went, yeah, but people are going to expect out of DC history, we got to bring somebody in.
Who was the one you didn't get that you wanted?
Metamorpho.
Really?
Oh, yeah, I wanted Metamorpho bad. I liked Metamorpho. I always liked Metamorpho. But he was right off in the Outsiders. Mike Barr grabbed him right away, and that kind of broke my heart. And then there were other people whose names came up, and it just didn't fit. I can't remember. I know one in particular that Len and I have worked on. And I remember him saying, don't bring up Wannabes. Because I'm not bringing up Wannabes. We already did them in the challenge.
I'm surprised.
He was like a running joke.
I'm surprised Jerry didn't bring Firestorm over to the new JLA, because that was a character he co-created and really championed over the year.
It's not fair for me to speculate. I'm going to speculate, but I don't know for sure. But I don't know if there was some kind of... One thing I learned from Jerry was get ownership. So I owe him forever for making my name come. He added my name to co-creator. And I know with Firestorm, and Jerry was very adamant that we get compensated. And I wasn't sure he was going through something like that with Firestorm, where DC was willing to accept him, but not Broderick. So I don't know how that worked out.
Then again, Jerry Firestorm also had his own books that might have knocked him out of the running also, because he still had his book going on at the time.
And again, that same problem came of continuity. The whole point.
Do you still stay in touch with Jerry?
I get little notes from him, from his wife, from him. In fact, she asked me to do something recently that really touched my heart, saying, hey, Jerry knows that you remember more of this than he does. So he really asks that you speak up and represent us. And he knows, and he and I have met a couple of years earlier again at a con where we put aside a lot of the old stuff that I felt and he felt. And I feel like, okay, my job is to make sure his legacy is clean. I loved DC at the time. I was probably more of a DC guy than ever. The Marvel story, when I got into New Talent and got JLA, and now I'm like graduated, and some of the guys I still hung out with at New Talent, we're always hustling. And one of the guys was going to Marvel, and he said, come along anyway. And I went, why not? I was starting to feel like, is this JLA thing going to happen? Because at that time, they were giving me a lot of shorts to do until JLA was ready. And I had spoken to Neil Adams before that, and Adams gave me the Sermon on the Mount that I was be your own man. And after he chewed out all these guys ahead of me, he basically offered me a job. And I listened to what he said and turned him down. He thought it was almost like the old kung fu test of snatch the pebble from my hand. And so when I told Neil, no, I'm going to stick with JLA, what Dick set up for me, he was like, good job. But I still was feeling like, am I really ready for this? So I took my stuff over to Marvel. And they wouldn't let you through the lobby at the time. They would take your stuff back behind this green metal door. And then there was some system would come out and basically tell you had no talent. That's exactly what happened to me. I did some Conan test pages, which I just found. Cracks me up. They're so bad. No wonder they chewed me out. But I remember I got it and sent it to him. 20 minutes later, she comes out and goes, they don't think you're ready yet. They really think you should go back and learn to draw washing machines and cars, get your perspective. And I'm going, it's Conan the Barbarian. I'm drawing him killing these guys in the alley. And she's talking about a fucking car and a refrigerator. I don't. And one of my friends pipes up and go, wait a minute, this guy just got JLA and you're telling him he's got to draw a refrigerator? Wait a minute. That doesn't even make sense. Why? And it was that division of Marvel going, well, he's not good enough for Marvel. If DC wants him, fine. And I took that as word and went, okay. And I didn't talk to him again for 2 more years. But 2 more years later, I get invited by Jim Shooter into his office and he offers me Daredevil.
How long were you on Daredevil?
Not very long. 1 book, and that was enough. It was
so your stint at Marvel was very short and succinct.
Very short. It was always through phone calls after that, and then I got very little things until this is all leading me up to go, comics is not paying off the way I want. Literally not paying off. And by that time, living in LA, a lot of other guys are living in LA. A lot of comic guys were now working in animation. And I didn't want to, but I had to listen to one of my older statesmen was Rick Holberg, because Rick's been at this longer. And he was like, dude, just come in and do 1 storyboard. Just work with me on a storyboard. And when you see that check, and he was right, I made more on drawing mules on Mr. T's adventures than I did on a month of JLA. So basically it came down to 5 panels compared to 28 pages, and I made more money.
So you were in animation for how many years then?
I'm in animation for well over 30-something years.
And are you surprised with how well it went for you?
Yeah, because I'm cutting down a lot. There was a lot of times where I was never Chuck Patton, or when I was Chuck Patton, I was aware of the BS behind the scenes. There were moments where I developed and worked on a lot of shows. Some people don't know I did up until the time I retired. I'm on paper as the last known director on Boondocks. It was the nail in the coffin that said it was time to go. But
really,
that's for me.
But you also won an Emmy back in the 1990s.
That was worth it, absolutely. And coming in on another problematic situation where, all we wanted to do was do a good show, and we got rewarded by getting the gold medal. Very difficult, but worth it.
Did you work on a lot of problematic shows and things.
One of my young artists used to joke about, dude, you're like Mr. Wolf from Pulp Fiction. Shit hits the fan, they call you in to fix it. I was like, yeah, they never call you at the beginning when you can really contribute something. They call you after somebody effed it up, and now you got to bring it home.
Do you have any desire to go back into comics?
Yes and no. And what I mean by that is that I have come back to comics, but I've finally learned the lesson of you come back for you. You do what you want to do. My desire to draw Batman is not as great as it was when I was 26.
What does Chuck Patton now at your age want to do?
I want to have an island and a yacht. No, I don't want a yacht. I can't swim. But what I want, honestly, is the thing I set out to do. I want to tell stories. I want to be able to draw what I like. I want to enjoy what I like to draw. Often I have done several or a few independent covers. As far as doing continuity for people, I resist that because I've been a boss. And when you've been a boss, it's a little hard to take orders from somebody who you don't trust or don't know or really don't respect. So I've done that enough.
Why not create and draw your own stuff? Something from
That's
scratch?
great. Sure. Do you have the energy for this? I'm talking to a friend of mine who has just done his first comic book, and his credentials and animation matches mine. It probably more so because I've done a couple of shows with him, and he's done his first comic book, and he is screaming to me, "Oh my God, it's hard." It goes, "Yes, it is. There's a lot that goes into being a comic artist. There's a lot of energy that you have to have. I'm lucky to have enough reserve shit from when I started, but I can't draw the way I used to draw back then. I would put in 24 hours. When I drew that JLA book in 3 weeks, that was on top of working 2 jobs at the beginning of that. And then I had to stop. And so I literally drew it in 2 weeks. But I was 26. I'm way past 65. So it's the tricks I have now. And also on writing. Writing is not easy. I don't care what anybody says. You got to be, even just listen to, just doing dialogue is difficult. Now, saying all that doesn't mean I can't do or won't do it. It's just finding the right vehicle and having the right amount of energy to get it done. You want the right vehicle to do that's fun. I always tell my artists, do shit.
And you've also earned that right to be picky and choosy.
Believe me, I run into some that crack me up thinking, oh, I'm doing you a favor.
Do you do conventions still now?
Started to do convention. Now, in the last 5 years, I've done more than I had in my own career.
How do you think of fans today who now looking back at that time of Justice League?
The truth is, yeah, I wouldn't be where I am today if it weren't for the fans. I joke and say this, but I mean it with all my heart. I'm nothing without them. If it weren't for the fans, and some who started working for me, by the way, I've had too many guys I've worked with who've come up to me and say, hey, I'm in this because of you. There is something very touching about that. It reminds, my parents are gone. They're no longer here. But I wish they could hear that because remember, we started this off talking about my mom freaking out, thinking he wants to do something that our people aren't allowed to do. She's never known of our people doing.
So what would your parents think about you today?
Let me finish.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay. It thrills me to no end that there are people who appreciate what I did, especially all the shit I went through with it, that it made it worthwhile going through. And like I said, my parents won't see that. But it gladdens me when I have a young kid comes up and say, they just saw Ninja Turtles for the first time. Not the other Ninja Turtles, your Ninja Turtles. That touches me. That touches me greatly. The work we did on Spawn. We may not agree or never even see Todd again, but he trusted me to work on that, and I appreciate it. He got the nod. He got through his hard work and creativity, created a character I got to borrow for 5 minutes. And it touches me that it has done a good job. It taught me how to be a director. It taught me how to be a better storyteller. All those things, if you're smart and you listen to that, means something. It makes up for all the bad inking. It makes up for the bad writing. It makes up for the bad editing. It made for the poor choices. Being told by Marvel I need to draw a refrigerator when I'm drawing a sword fight in the alley. Thanks a lot.
Do you draw good refrigerators these days now?
I don't draw almost every day.
Okay.
But because a lot of it is recovering from being burnt out. I was burnt out for a long time from working on it. That was one of the reasons. Again, on Boondocks, there was a lot going on politics-wise that I was looking at if I was lucky to get 6 months out of the job. We got less than 6 months. On the other hand, it afforded me the hours I needed so I can go, you know what? It's tiring to be Mr. Wolf. I want to be my own guy. And so by this time, all the restraints I've had, which is usually working on other jobs, dealing with other productions. Now I can draw for me. I'm learning that love I had when I was 5, to scribble again. And so I'm trying to do that. On my page, I try to put up positive shit that I like to draw, whether people want it or not. I love when I draw something and someone goes, "Oh, no, now draw this." And they go, "No, you don't understand. I did this so I don't have to do that." You know? And I'm putting it out there honestly. If I wanted your opinion, I'd ask. But generally, this is mine. If you like it, great.
I'm going to give you the final words. What do you have to say before we wrap this up today?
I appreciate this. The thing I love about these podcasts is that's the other love. You guys asking me questions, helping me, letting me go down memory lane, letting me put things in perspective, it reminds me of gratitude of I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you guys. If you didn't buy the books, if you didn't have the memories, if you didn't cut me off, I appreciate your energy on this. And it helps me because there are times when we sit there and we go, again, when you stop hustling, you got to find another thing to do. If you can't hustle, at least be engaged. So what this does is keeps me engaged, and I appreciate the fuck out of it. So thank you.
Chuck Patton, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.